This is a short narrated PowerPoint to introduce the limbic system. And since we've learned about the cortex, the cerebral cortex, and then we've learned about some of what I call the interior brain, now we need to learn about the limbic system. And this will be a little bit more interesting because probably what you're thinking now is my brain's a bunch of neurons connected in pathways. I might as well be a robot. But the limbic system will change your idea and really personalize your brain once you learn a little bit about it. The definition is it's the area of the brain that regulates emotion and memory. It influences your responses to emotions, motivation, mood, and also sensations of pain and pleasure. Sometimes it's easiest to get a handle on the limbic system by just thinking about a few little examples where it's illustrated. For example, do you know of a song that makes you feel like you were somewhere else in the past? From when you first formed a memory of that song and linked it to some emotional experience or people or situation. So maybe you can think of an example. Another way to think of the limbic system, oftentimes a smell. A smell will remind you of being somewhere or with somebody, and it's a very powerful memory. Let me give you a short example of when I first realized about the limbic system, connected it to a powerful memory. I worked in a florist when I was in high school for a short time, and one day I took some leftover gardenias that my boss had from a wedding, and I took them home. I was going to put these little gardenia flowers in a bowl in the kitchen. My mother walked into the kitchen and said, "What's that? Get those out of here," and walked out. And I was just so astounded. I was just so shocked. I took these little nice smelling gardenia flowers to the garage. She walks back in the kitchen. I look at her, and then she explains herself. She tells me, "You had gardenias, didn't you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Gardenias remind me of my grandma's funeral," and that was very upsetting to me. So there's an example of a very powerful memory that got linked to a smell that she doesn't often smell, but when she does smell it, boy, it brings back those memories. And it was a very difficult funeral and ending to having her grandma that she was very close with. One more current example is the question, do Adele's songs make you cry? And you might recall a Saturday Night Live skit, and we will look at some of Adele's songs and some of the qualities that might help you understand if or why people cry. Okay, so let's look at a model. And so let's look at this diagram that's kind of a model. Look up at the blue area, the neocortex. That's the modern, more newly evolved part of the human brain, your cortex. Remember, your higher logic, reasonings, things that make you uniquely human, things that animals can't do. Then look down at what's nicknamed the reptilian brain. Here you got the pons, the medulla, things that all animals, not just, say, primates, but reptiles, lower animals have. Lower animals have to have coordination and breathing and heart rate regulation. Well, in between those is the limbic system. And the limbic system gets input from the lower parts of the brain. The limbic system can influence your cortex, and it can also get information from the cortex, and then the limbic system can influence some very powerful parts of your brain. So they're all really very interconnected. So here's a diagram with some colored areas of the limbic system. We won't go through all of these, but we'll go through some of the major areas. And you can see it is more towards the interior part of the brain, but some of the cortex, the cerebral cortex, is involved as well. So I'm going to hit a few of the more common areas and things that you'll run into later as we study how does this work, and what can go wrong with the limbic system as far as addictions. First, the amygdala. This is a tiny, tiny area, and these tiny little areas of the limbic system help you learn fear and anxiety. They help you learn what to fear and remember what to fear. So it's a very protective part of the brain. Also, the amygdala has a role in expressing negative emotions. So take a look at the pictures of some people at the bottom of the slide. When these pictures are shown to people with damaged amygdalas, sometimes they don't recognize the emotion of fear. Also, the amygdala is enlarged in PTDS, post-traumatic distress syndrome. So we're seeing some of these problems with vets. And does this make sense? Okay, if the amygdala helps you balance fear and anxiety, does it make sense then if vets have some problems after war? It's because they've experienced a lot of perhaps fear and anxiety, and some of that regulation is disturbed. Okay, next here is the hippocampus. And for a long time they thought, oh, the hippocampus is just your memory. It's memory. Now we know that memory is much more complex. Another really interesting thing, besides memory, like recalling memories, getting information ready to be placed in long-term memory, the hippocampus has been determined to be very important in spatial processing. Awareness of your spatial landscape. And one big research project was they studied the hippocampus with some cab drivers in London. It was a big project because it's really incredible how many streets and landscapes and addresses that they can hold in their memory. So they learned the importance of the hippocampus. Okay, the hypothalamus. You might say, oh, we already covered that. That was all about homeostasis. I hope that you did kind of connect with that. And besides homeostasis, the hypothalamus is also a really big part of the limbic system. It links the other parts of the brain to the endocrine or glandular system. And that's because right by the hypothalamus is this pituitary gland, and it is called your master gland. It secretes at least 7 major hormones. Let me give you some examples. Your pituitary gland secretes a hormone that would stimulate some of your puberty hormones. Your pituitary gland secretes thyroid stimulating hormone to stimulate your thyroid gland to balance out, your hunger and weight and energy levels. So it's a very, very powerful gland. That's just a couple of examples. So it probably makes sense that your hypothalamus does respond to stress and hormones from the other parts of the body, and then it in turn can secrete some hormones. Another thing that might surprise you, maybe not, but I told you the limbic system often involves a sense of smell. The hypothalamus in particular responds to smells. And that's because it's very, very close in proximity to the nose. There's only one synapse between your receptors in your nose and the hypothalamus. And also it's because the hypothalamus is involved in some of the more primitive functions of the brain. And smell is involved in animals, some of our relative animals, as far as in retrieving food and also in finding a mate of the opposite sex for reproductive success. Okay. Again, I mentioned some of these. The the sense of smell linked to stronger memories. And let's see. Again, smells can bring back powerful memories, could be good or bad. Another example, I like to teach you by examples. You probably figured that out. Here's an example of a bad smell with a memory. One of our sons, my husband and I were traveling, and our sons were staying with their grandparents for an extended time, and they were quite young. Our older son they went to a restaurant, and our older son drank some orange juice at a buffet and threw up in the restaurant, which was really, really emotionally traumatic at his age with his parents not there. And uh, I really believe that he has not had a glass of orange juice since then. So again, just the smell of orange juice, just plain orange juice, he doesn't like it. He'll always make a comment, "Oh, I don't do orange juice. It's just I can't get past that throwing up incident." So again, powerful memories. The next one is the cingulate cortex, and that is part of the cerebrum. So you can again say, well, gee, isn't that part of the cerebrum? Isn't that separate from the limbic system? See, through the years we've learned that the limbic system does involve part of the cortex. This area guides behavior and decisions when motions are involved. So again, emotions influence decisions, and decisions can influence your emotions. It's kind of like a two-way street here. This area has a role in predicting and avoiding negative consequences. And you're not going to like to hear this, but this area is not fully myelinated till age 20. And that's why some people say that teens are more susceptible to making decisions where there's some negative consequences. They can't really think like an adult because physically the neurons are not as mature. It's cut off on the bottom of my screen a little, but OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is linked to problems in this area. And that you can probably connect that because the obsessive compulsive disorder individual sees a lot of negative consequences and can't figure out how to navigate without some fear of some illness and things not being correct and all kinds of bad things happening, and they have more emotion involved in analyzing their own behavior than the normal person. Okay, so that's a little summary of the major areas of the limbic system, and what we'll be doing next is, now that you have a feel for the limbic system, we'll see how it's involved and gets messed up in things like addictions. So that concludes the limbic system.